You've probably heard of cycle syncing. It sounds logical. It makes sense. You match your workouts to different parts of your menstrual cycle. You train harder when your body is primed and high on energy and can really soak up those benefits of strength training. And then you dial it back when you're lower on energy and hormones make it harder to recover. But does the science back it up? Well, the research doesn't fully support cycle syncing for your workouts, and there's actually a lot of research on this. In one of the studies, they analyzed over 78 different studies, and the conclusion they came to is that we can't fully support cycle syncing. It should be an individualized, personalized approach. But I'm here to tell you we can learn a lot from the cycle syncing workouts so that we're working with our bodies instead of against our bodies. First up, let's talk about energy levels because they are different during different phases of the cycle, and we can learn a lot from this. In the menstrual phase, this is, for lack of a better word, these are the bleeding days. Estrogen and progesterone are low, so energy may be lower, but less fatigue and better recovery. Believe it or not, this is the time to work out. The follicular phase, days 6 to 14. And I should mention, this is assuming we all have a perfect 28-day cycle. I know in perimenopause, I do not have a perfect 28-day cycle. In fact, I get it more often than I'd like. Okay, so follicular phase, this is days 6 to 14. Estrogen rises, insulin sensitivity improves, and recovery is faster. So you might see a lot of progress in this period. And then you have ovulation, and then the luteal phase, which is basically the 2 weeks after ovulation. Progesterone rises, insulin sensitivity drops, and fatigue can increase. So I'm going to be breaking it down into 3 parts. We've got before ovulation, after ovulation, and PMS. So the first half, this is basically bleeding up until ovulation. This is the prime time for heavy lifts. I mean, physiologically, your body is primed and ready, doing your daily steps and adding HIIT cardio. Now, if you're like me, I tend to have major cramps 1 or 2 days before my period starts and then day 1 of my period. So I definitely listen to my body, and I know because I've been tracking my cycle, and I know that my PMS days as well as day 1 of my period, I walk. It helps reduce inflammation. I feel better. It betters my symptoms. But know that the first half, again, from bleeding to ovulation, physiologically, your body is primed and ready for those heavy lifts. But listen to your body, especially on that day 1 or day 2 of your period. So in this first half, hormones aid in muscle strength, growth, and repair. We are more resilient to stress. Our hormones reduce fatigue and inflammation. And then we have that improved insulin sensitivity. And what that means is we've got better glycogen storage in our muscles, which leads to higher energy and better performance because your body, it's readily available. So the second half, this is after you ovulate through those PMS days up until your period starts. You might experience slower recovery, especially in the days leading up to your period. You might experience lower energy, reduced strength, and slower recovery. So if you look at the cycle syncing general recommendations, this is when it's actually recommended to alter the course of your training, where you use lighter weights, you extend your rest periods, you swap for stress-reducing workouts. But we know the exercise science shows you can't train for 2 weeks and then take it easy for 2 weeks and then train for 2 weeks and then take it easy for 2 weeks. You know, it would be a perpetual cycle. But don't completely write it off, because I absolutely believe, and the research shows, that altering your schedule during the PMS days, not necessarily in the second half after ovulation all the way through to getting your period, but simply altering or editing those workouts around your PMS days can be very beneficial. So now we enter the third part. So your first part was period up through ovulation. Second part was ovulation up through PMS, where things are a little different. You're lower on energy and recovery is harder. But during those PMS days, this is when you're experiencing symptoms. Changes in hormones lead to an increase in inflammation and a change in our energy levels, right? So this is where I recommend you swap maybe some heavier lifts or strength training for mobility and lighter resistance workouts, maybe a core and mobility workout or a bar workout or a Pilates workout where you're staying low and grounded to the floor. So in parts 1 and 2, you don't really change anything. This is generally the first 3.5 weeks of your cycle. Again, if we're talking about a perfect 4-week cycle. So generally, the first 3.5 weeks, you don't change anything until those PMS symptoms arrive, up until day 1 of your period, maybe day 2 of your period. In our weekly schedule, we call this the de-stress and PMS collection. You simply swap the regularly scheduled workouts for these workouts that are closer to the mat. Or one of my favorite types of exercise to do during the PMS stage, up until usually about day 2 of my period, is walking. Walking. I want to shout it from the mountaintops. Walking is so beneficial. It is so good for reducing systemic inflammation and decreasing stress, helping with that bloating. It helps regulate cortisol levels. I like to think of walking as my healing pump. It delivers oxygen to the body and it optimizes cell function. So during those PMS days, those few days leading up to menstruation or when you start your period, you swap those days for workouts that are closer to the mat, stretching, recovery, walking. Any of those will serve your body well during this part of your cycle. Oh, and one more thing I should mention, this is a really good time to incorporate some recovery strategies, like an Epsom salt bath, heat. Oh, heat is so good. A sauna session. I love nothing more than a sauna session. I don't know what it is as I get older, but I love the heat and all the healing properties that heat can bring. In fact, for my birthday, usually my husband and I don't get each other birthday gifts. I need a card. I don't need anything more than that, but he nailed it this year. He got me an infrared sauna blanket, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. So incorporate those recovery strategies during those PMS days. Okay, so I've given you the broad spectrum, the first half before you ovulate. Your body's physiologically and primed, ready to hit it hard. The second half, lower recovery times, lower energy. Don't necessarily alter your schedule till you get to those PMS days, to that third part. That is when I recommend you alter or edit your normal workout routine. But it is so important, this is when we get into that personalized, individualized approach, that you know your cycle. And this is where tracking comes in. I mean, there's like 1,000,001 tracking apps for your menstrual cycle because it's probably going to be changing. I know in my 40s, my cycles changed. Now I have 2 days of PMS and lots of cramping that I didn't used to have. So those are the days, as I mentioned earlier, that I walk. I walk every single day. And usually day 1 of my period, maybe day 2, I'm still walking. I'm not getting back into my strength training routine quite yet. But I had to track this to figure myself out. My exact routine is not going to be your exact routine. When you're tracking, you want to track things like this. Do you feel strong? Was it hard to recover? What were your symptoms that day? Are you fatigued? Is it perceived fatigue? Is it hormone fatigue? Life's unpredictabilities. Did I not sleep last night because 3 of my kids had the flu? You want to track things like that. And I always say, like in our weekly schedule, I always say, and this is at any time of your cycle, that there are days where you're going to show up and you've got 50%. And that's all you give, and we give ourselves grace, and we are searching for progression, not perfection. But if you track for a couple months, you can start to see some common denominators and then adjust accordingly. Okay, so now we know how to individualize our own type of workout program, but I want to give you 4 key components to seeing results. Okay, so number 1, we've been talking a lot about recovery because lower estrogen levels mean less muscle repair and more inflammation, making it harder to bounce back. I like to refer to this as what worked in your 30s might not work in your 40s. Or like, for example, for me in my 30s, oh my gosh, I love to hit workout. The more I could toss the dumbbells up and over my head and the more sweat that was on the ground, the more productive I thought I was being. And then in my 40s, well, that simply stopped working. And that's another episode, the reasons behind that. But recovery is a huge part of it. And for me, I would do like a full body workout followed by the next day doing a cardio hit workout with full plyometrics, and I was completely disrupting my recovery. And what that led to was chronic inflammation. Oh, and burnout. Had that too, but the chronic inflammation. So let's talk about structuring recovery into your routine, because we know hormones play a role in perimenopause. Estrogen and progesterone are already declining and fluctuating. So you're already gonna have recovery feeling pretty inconsistent, but those hormones play a big role in the repair of your body. So you need to structure recovery 48 hours, roughly 48 hours between muscle groups. So this means you might work upper body one day, lower body the next day. You might do full body one day, walk the next day, full body the next day, walk the next day. But it is really important that you get that recovery in there, because here's what happens in the recovery process. You got little tiny micro tears in your muscles, and your body just brings all this goodness to do that repair. But if you don't give those muscles that 48 hours to repair, that disrupts the recovery process. And what that leads to is chronic inflammation. And we don't work out for chronic inflammation. We work out to feel good and get rid of inflammation. So make sure structured recovery is a part of your routine. In our weekly schedule, we built that in, and then even on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we walk those days and we take total recovery days. And when I say recovery days, I don't mean sit and be sedentary. Walk. You are still getting in your daily steps. Walk, 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 walk. And number 2, you need to be using progressive overload in your strength training. This is just a fancy way of saying you gradually make your workouts harder over time to continue to promote lean muscle and functional strength without stalling out, without hitting a plateau. Now, the easiest way to think of progressive overload is doing the same routine and simply increasing your weights or increasing your dumbbells. But I recommend using progressive overload by gradually increasing the stress on your body using bands, sliders, isometric holds, tempo training, where you spend more amount of time in the eccentric or the lengthening phase of the exercise, or using balls or different balance challenges to apply that progressive overload without having to increase your dumbbells every month. Now, increasing your weights and doing heavier lifts are super important, but I don't want you to think that that is the only way that you can do progressive overload. There are many other factors in getting in that progressive overload. And number 3, you need 150 minutes of moderate cardio each week. This is your walking, and I did not just pull 150 minutes out of a hat. It is actually based on all of the research. Now, if you are newer to exercise, I recommend you start with that 150 minutes of walking each week. When I do my calculations, if you're like me, I love a pedometer. I don't use a Fitwatch. I have what used to be a $5 pedometer, but somebody asked me for a link, and I noticed now it's $12. It's this tiny little pedometer. You clip it on, and it counts your steps, and it is super accurate. So when I do my calculations, 150 minutes of walking each week can be done with about 5,000 daily steps just accumulated, or a dedicated 30 to 40 minute walk. And either way, however you can get there is going to be beneficial. Now, as you get more conditioned, just as with strength training, just as we do progressive overload with strength training, as you get more conditioned, you will need to maybe add some inclines a few times a week, add a weighted vest a few times a week, increase your steps to 8,000 to 12,000 steps a day. However you can fit it in your time budget, you will need to add some variation. So you start with 150 minutes of walking, or roughly 5,000 daily steps, and then you increase that by adding steps, adding a weighted vest. I love to add a weighted vest, but I only do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week when I really want to get a good sweat in, or adding some inclines. And then number 4, let's talk nutrition in regards to our cycle. Women who have more intense PMS symptoms, I don't think I need to tell you this, tend to have more extreme cravings for carbohydrates. And this all goes back to hormones, as you may be preset to have more powerful symptoms, heavier periods, shorter, longer cycles. But the good news is there are a few things you can do to support your body as it's going through your cycle. Okay, so let's talk about those bleeding days, your period days. This is when anti-inflammatory foods and foods with iron are going to be pretty important because your body is experiencing a lot of inflammation. I know for me, because I've done my tracking, that my PMS days, actually probably a day before my PMS days, probably 3 days before my period, and then day 1 and day 2 of my period, my inflammation is at an all-time high. Didn't used to be that way, but in my 40s, it now is. So I've got major inflammation for about 4 or 5 days, and these are the days that I walk, and I actually walk more than I walk any other day. I've got more time because I've scaled back on some of the other training, but I walk, I stretch, and then I really pay attention to the anti-inflammatory foods. So dial in on foods like beef, chicken, citrus fruits, peppers, broccoli, ginger, turmeric, garlic. Stay away from sugary processed foods. The way I like to think of processed foods is it's anything that has to have something done to it, right? So try to stick to foods that are closest to their natural state because that is going to help you decrease that inflammation. So those are the mainstays. Now, after ovulation, research has shown that increasing your omega-3s is going to be very beneficial. Now, Stephanie, our registered dietitian, wrote an entire article on this, so I'm not going to go into the weeds on it, but you want to up your intake of omega-3s, and this is salmon, coconut oil, olive oil, avocados, walnuts. Now, also what helps our omega-3s is decreasing our omega-6s, which are found in all of those processed foods. And then as you approach your period and you've got those PMS days, be prepared with healthy sweet foods like fruit, Greek yogurt, dates, apple chips, and dark chocolate. During your PMS days, you're also going to be experiencing some bloating, which is a little different from inflammation. Inflammation is kind of felt throughout the entire body, but bloating is more or less right around your stomach area. So you want to make sure that you are drinking plenty of water, at least 80 to 100 ounces a day. Remember that it needs to be sugar-free, caffeine-free liquid. That is how you get your water, but never be afraid to add a little excitement with some lemons or oranges or different flavors to your water. As always, if you want to see the sources from this episode, I've included that in the show notes, as well as a free trial to our weekly schedule. We strength train together, and then you add your daily steps. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, during your PMS days, you'll want to swap the workouts in the weekly schedule for our de-stress and PMS workouts. So check out the show notes and click for that free trial.